Ogre's Wolf Prologue. Monster. Beast. Demon. Atrocity. Abomination. Monstrosity. Unnatural. For the first time in his life, the words that had been hurled at him seemed to penetrate his usual indifference. He had always known he was a monster, even though he had never indulged himself in the appetites and urges of being one as much as others of his kind had. It had never bothered him what the villagers and other magical beings called his breed. Instead, he had always worn the insults and exclamations of horror as armor of some sort. Or maybe it was just thanks to his thick skin, one of the few benefits of being born an ogre. Now those names stuck into his flesh like jagged pieces of mirror, tugging and cutting at his being and reflecting his appearance right back at him like a taunt. See, you are hideous, and you will never be anything but a hideous beast. Who could ever love a creature so ugly? He even gets the ones he loves hurt for his own selfishness. They whispered as they crawled under his skin, like parasites feeding off of his insecurities. Man, did he miss that impenetrable leathery rock-like skin now. The woodcutter's axe buried about half-blade depth across his broad shoulders was proof enough that he wasn't as invincible as he had once been. Though judging the 4 dozen arrows shot at him had hardly nipped his thick furred hide, maybe he was a little less invincible, but not much. He was surprised that this body wasn't more fragile, but he wasn't asking questions or complaining. As long as he kept running on relatively level ground, the axe in his shoulders didn't even seem to hinder him at all, or hurt all that much. The deep slash across his hind leg protested though, especially when he leapt over a log or bounded up a slope. The twin daggers in his side were a minor inconvenience too as far as he was concerned, considering the third had fallen out by itself in his mad dash through the woods. They had been a kind courtesy from a particularly annoying knife-throwing human, but they seemed to be the least of his problems. He could already feel another one of the daggers slipping free, probably a combined effort from his buddy's ability to heal and regenerate and the constant jostle of running. He had to admit, aside from the obvious issue with the frangibleness of this form, he was really coming to enjoy the perks of being a wolf that he had never had as an ogre. The heightened hearing, the sharp eyesight, the speed and the agility. He wouldn't mind staying a wolf forever, not if it meant saving the life of the female clutching to his back while he ran his hardest to find her help. Being a wolf forever would mean that he could never be with her, but keeping her alive was more important than his own feelings. She held large fists full of black fur in her hands as she strained to stay on his back, but her attempts were getting weaker as she began to slip into unconsciousness. Fear that she might fall off and injure herself even further gnawed at him, and so did the worry of how he was going to carry her if she fell unconscious and could no longer cling to his fur to keep from falling. He was stuck on 4 paws. He didn't have strong arms to scoop her up and hold her close while he ran further. If she fell, then he would need to get her back up and keep going at a much slower pace, but he knew if he slowed down now then they wouldn't reach help in time. With a frown etched onto his wolfish face he looked over his shoulder, keeping one eye in front of him so that he didn't plow nose first into a tree. Her face was scrunched up, skin pale and clammy, as the silvery white light of the moon filtering through the branch canopy above caused dark patterns to flash over her tense form. Ominous dark shadows threatening to swallow up the goddess-like sheen that the indigo blue of the night blessed her with. The thick of the woods meant that they had long escaped their pursuers, but the dark omen of shadow swallowing up the she-wolf's life force bothered him, and he longed to see the glow of moon and night reflecting off the bare patches of skin where they showed among the tattered remains of her clothes. Even when taut with paint, and covered in dirt and blood, she was still the most beautiful creature in the world to him, though he could hardly bear looking at her with the condition she was in. His frown grew deeper as his attention lingered on her skin, and he wondered if that was all her blood, or were her injuries less serious than they seemed with the blood of others on her. She seemed really pale though, paler than when he had glanced back a few minutes ago, and her fevered tremors echoing through his spine, clenched at his heart. Her whimpers and faint intakes of breath had grown weaker too. He was sure, he could hardly tell if she was still breathing at all. Showing his long sharp fangs in defiance he jerked his head back to the invisible path ahead of him. He wouldn't lose her, he couldn't. She was a goddess, she was his goddess, and he was damned if he was going to let her die. If only he had had a set of human hands to dig into the wound on her thigh where a silver blade had remained after the hilt had broken off, then she wouldn't be in so much pain. He had managed to pull the arrows and other weapons out with his teeth, but he feared that there were more than one injury infected with the poison that was silver than just the one on her thigh. With a harsh pang of guilt and another agonized glance back at the female's thigh and the bluish blood seeping from the wound, he let out a deep guttural growl and kicked off harder, ignoring the sharp tug of pain that shot up his injured leg and burned like fire up his hindquarters. The pain threatened to bring him to his belly, but he didn't care. He just kept running, harder and faster. His goddess was dying, he knew it. He just hoped to the gods that he could make it to a place where she could get help before it was too late. He was useless to her in this form. He couldn't get the silver out of her system. He couldn't dress her wounds. He couldn't do anything for her. What could he ever have offered her? Pain and suffering? He had sure delivered on that part. He knew that he was a monster, and he knew that he would always be one, even if he hid himself under the skin of another kind. A part of him knew that what had happened to them, to his goddess, had not been his fault. The other part blamed himself for ever getting involved. Maybe if he had stayed away, hadn't made a deal, then the woman he loved wouldn't have ended up where she was now. The small voice whispered that she could have ended up worse if he hadn't gotten involved, but he was too far gone in his decision to listen to reason. He blamed himself, and he was going to fix it. If he could, then he would fix everything. He wanted to demand that she be healed, and for everything to be put back the way they were, like none of it had ever happened, but he knew that was too simple to wish for. He only hoped that the witch couldn't say no to the price he was willing to offer.